On the one hand, there is nothing unique about Homicide Hours to Kill. It's like a lot of other true crime documentaries where somebody has been murdered and the episodes do little reconstructions. It takes you through what happened and how the case was resolved with words from detectives, journalists, forensic specialists involved in the case at the time. But what I love about this is that it's flawless. Every single episode delivered. I haven't watched a long true crime documentary that I've loved this much since Kenda. And I think it is very similar in style, rather than, it doesn't obviously have the one main host, but it's very similar in that it looks at these cases and the way they're detailed, the way they're told, the balance between recounting the story and giving us factual scientific information is perfect, and that balance is brilliant. What makes this one, I guess, a little bit more unique than a lot of others is that this specifically looks at the final 24 hours of a victim's life. So once they've determined, where possible, when the victim was murdered, it takes us back through that individual's, I guess, activities 24 hours before that, who they spoke to, where they were last seen, were they working, did they go to a bar, and they use that backtracking over those 24 hours to help establish who the culprit is, or the suspect, which I think is really unique because, well, slightly unique, because, a lot of true crimes will look at forensic evidence and it will, it will use fingerprint analysis and things to work out who it was. But this one is more focused on the timeline beforehand rather than the evidence at the scene. Obviously, evidence at the scene is important, such as footprints, fingerprints, blood spatter that may be on the culprit's clothing as well. But it's all about basically what you do in 24 hours can then lead to this happening. And I don't think anybody right now, certainly if you're spending your time listening to me talking about this, would suspect that they'd be murdered within the next 24 hours. And I think that that's really interesting that it looks at the 24 hours. It's not the only show to do that, of course, but the fact that that's the main focus and we get to fully understand what that victim was doing in that time leading up to their death. Some of the victims had really interesting lives. Some of them were doing really interesting things. Some of them had, scarily so, quite mundane lives. They went to work, they picked up the kids, whatever, they showered, were sitting down to watch TV and were murdered. Stuff that we all do. And sometimes it's not obvious. They will find a suspect, they will tell us about this suspect, and as a viewer, it's easy to sit there and think, yes, they did it, that is obviously the suspect. Now let's watch how they're convicted. And we do get to see real interview footage and things like that. So it's very involved. It's not just reconstructions. It's very intense, very detailed, and an absolute pleasure to watch. And each episode is very different as well. It's not just, familial crime or anything. It's very mixed. And there are some that are quite shocking. There are some that are brutal. Some of them are quite run-of-the-mill, a burglary gone wrong or, well, familicide. But some of them are quite outrageous. And the best part, for me, as a serial true crime viewer, I don't believe I'd heard of any of these cases. I could be wrong, I could be misremembering it. There are about 30 episodes. But off the top of my head, I don't think any other true crime show that I have seen had covered any of these. So it's completely fresh perspective and an absolute joy to watch. It's a Canadian show done by Cineflix Productions. I watched it on Amazon Prime. I believe it was part of the Crime and Investigation TV channel, which you absolutely must subscribe to if you like true crime. It is brilliant. I hope that there's going to be a third series. The original series was in 2017. The second season, was in 2019. So it being 2021 now, I hope that we are now due for season 3. I definitely hope that that's going to happen. It's absolutely brilliant. The narration is great. The The reconstructions are not overly cheesy, which can often be the case. The balance, as I said, of recounting the narrative and giving us scientific fact, brilliant. Great footage, CCTV footage, interview footage, audio recordings, interviews with either potential victims, surviving victims, families of the murdered. Great mix of detectives, forensic psychologists. Absolutely fantastic. I'm devastated that it was only 2 seasons, because I would love to have seen more. Fingers crossed there will be more, but if you love true crime, this is definitely one that you can binge watch. Homicide Hours to Kill is pretty perfect.